Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. The topic of our talk today is cloud privileges, cloud privileged access, and why it's different than the root accounts on servers. I'm Poghosyan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Britive. We're a cloud identity and privilege management platform. My co-presenter today is
Hey, I'm Sriram Santhanam. I'm a Senior Director of Information Security and Workforce Technology Experience at Gap Inc. My team provides identity services, including cloud identity for all of the Gap Inc. brands, Old Navy, Gap, Banana Republic, Athleta, and also the corporate services.
Great. Sriram, take it away.
Thank you, Art. This is 2022, and I'm preaching to the choir. But I'm sure 90% of all folks here belong to a company that is in some stage of their cloud journey. But it's always good to revisit the basics for the purpose of this talk. And with that, I'm just going to talk about what is the cloud promise and why do companies actually move to the cloud. The cloud definitely promises business agility, faster implementation, scalability, and consolidated costs. You get a single bill. And this also has made a lot of companies take the step towards cloud transformation, including traditionally risk-averse segments like healthcare or finance and so on. But in the rapid transformation that's happening, there are definitely some that produces a few security concerns along the way. And a lot of these stems from one major fact that we are going to talk about today, and that is privileged access abuse, right? So in fact, Gartner says that 75% of all the security failures are stemming from mismanagement or inadequate management of identities, access, and privileges. And look at this, 90% of companies are already in the cloud, and 75% of the issues with respect to their security posture comes from mismanagement of identities and the privileges. What a big attack surface that is. But how do we get to this stage? Why does this even happen in the first place to begin with? So let's see what happens in a typical company. Companies move to the cloud because they want the speed and agility that's associated with the cloud. This also means that the developers and the other tech folks who are actually tasked with these mandates have to do it in a very short period of time. So sometimes companies take shortcut in terms of providing elevated permissions or access that's excessive access more than what is actually required. There is also the issue of standing permissions or long-lasting privileges that last beyond the duration of when the particular privilege is needed. And there is also the issue of inherited permissions. This means that you don't even know you have permissions, but you actually got the permissions because there were some nested IAM groups or some weird IAM policy that actually grants you this access because of what goes on behind the scenes. So all of this actually creates a big attack vector, attack surface that cyber criminals can actually use. And this all points to the fact that the traditional approach of securing just your admin credentials or your root accounts is not just enough in this multi-cloud environment that we operate in. I'd like to take a small pause and ask if Art has any observations from his side on what these challenges present.
Yeah, sure. I think, Sriram, you have some of the main ones already noted in the slides, but two things I'd add to that is one of the biggest challenges with multi-cloud is that each and every cloud technology, platform, application has their own security model, has their own access and privilege system. Even nomenclature is very different. It's very complex for organizations to have to learn all that. It takes time and resources. It's a steep learning curve. And the second aspect, I think, it goes back to a little bit this point about standing permissions. A lot of organizations and IAM teams often take the approach that they used on-prem for securing privileges to multi-cloud environments, like perpetually granting access and permissions. But it turns out it's a problem in the multi-cloud environment because the risk exposure that it creates, it's disproportionately higher than in on-prem environments. We'll talk more about that later.
Cool. Thank you, Art. And all this points to is if you don't have a properly managed multi-cloud environment, that actually becomes less secure than your traditional environments. And many times, companies try to address this with adapting their legacy solutions to the cloud, or by also coming up with DIY solutions. There are some pitfalls to it. I'm just summarizing the top ones. The first thing is, this means that you need to have a team of experts who are actually who have expertise in all the different clouds that you're operating in, right? This means that you need to have AWS experts, you need to have Azure security experts, you need to have even experts who are have the expertise in terms of how to secure your SaaS environment, Salesforce, ServiceNow, et cetera, right? So it's very difficult to actually scale, which points down to the second question. Second point here is the scalability aspect of it. You all know how difficult it is to actually retain talent, security talent, but it also means that in this case, you have somebody who implemented something, and CSPs or cloud service providers keep on updating their offerings, and you need your own solutions to catch up with what's happening in those spaces. So in the longer term, it's very difficult to manage and scale. And it's also, the third point is the time to value. So you want a solution that you can implement now. You don't want to go and develop something from the ground up, because that also means that you are going against the very reason you're moving to the cloud, which is the speed and agility associated with it. And during all this time, you're either exposing yourself to the risk that already exists based on what we saw, or you tighten down your environment so much that you actually don't meet the business needs that it's supposed to meet, right? So these are all some of the issues associated with DIY solutions. With that, how, as we are all identity professionals gathered here, how can we actually solve this, and what are the steps that can be taken? In order to throw some light on that, I would like to pass it on to Art.
Thank you. Thank you, Sriram. Yeah, we all agree and recognize how challenging it is to secure a constantly moving and evolving landscape like multi-cloud environments. The good news is there are some best practices, or emerging best practices that are have been successfully implemented and that we can implement in our organizations to help protect the environment, but also allow the organization to benefit from the cloud opportunities. Let's look at three main ones. First, you have to have visibility across the cloud landscape. There's a saying, you can't secure what you can't see. In the cloud, it comes down to having the ability to automatically discover who has what access in what cloud environment and what they're doing with their access or their privileges. With visibility comes the ability to enforce controls and security policies. Also, having the benefit of the accurate and timely data on access and identities across the cloud landscape helps make the audits more efficient and less disruptive for the business. And yes, of course, it helps prevent fines or penalties due to regulatory noncompliance. Next, we need to focus on reducing the risk that comes with privileged access. Earlier, Sriram noted this risk related to standing access, for example. This is really the approach, the old approach of taking what worked on the on-prem to the cloud environments. For example, granting AWS S3 admin role or global admin in the Azure environment to users on a perpetual basis, or even API keys that never expire. The problem with this is that it does create this massive exposure to a blast radius if those credentials were compromised. What's a better way to deal with that? Well, more cloud-native approaches exist. For example, moving to a zero standing privilege posture. What does this mean in reality? It means authorizing the privileges that are needed for users, and that includes both human identities and what we call the synthetic identities like workloads, machines, and so on. Authorizing the privileges that they need, but granting them on demand on just-in-time basis when they need, and automatically revoking when the task is completed or the policy, the time limit expires, in order to return back to the zero standing posture. Also, it's important to continuously evaluate what privileges are being used, what is being done with that access. And for that, you can look at the activity, or the solutions have to look at the activity that's performed by users and reevaluate how much of what was granted is being utilized in order to help drive for least privileged access policy implementation, enforcement. Clearly, automation and consistency are key components of effectively reducing the risk of privileged access in the cloud. Sriram, question for you, and being the practitioner, the IAM practitioner in the space, what is your experience, what are your observations, especially around this zero standing privilege concept? Can it be implemented? Has it been done before in the enterprise environment especially?
Thanks, Art, and thanks for summarizing the best practices. But definitely I agree and with the zero standing privileges posture, because we have done it with a few different approaches. Definitely just-in-time privilege escalation works, and that's something that we have implemented. Also, moving on to ephemeral credentials, or you actually create the credentials on demand, also works. And since you already had your cool line, here's one cool line from me, is you cannot exploit what doesn't exist. So if the escalated privilege doesn't exist, you cannot exploit it. If the credential itself doesn't exist, you cannot exploit it. So it's a clean way, neat way to actually prevent attacks is by not having those credentials available in the first place. But the other thing, when we implemented it, one area of friction that we did have was having these different approaches for different cloud environments. So the consistency point that you made resonates with me from that sense, because from an adoption perspective, if you want your DevOps teams to actually start adopting these best practices, it might be better to have a consistent approach. So that's something that resonated with me from the slide.
Excellent. I like that line, by the way. You can't exploit what doesn't exist. Thank you. Last but not least, we need to really align security policies with cloud-native workflows and cloud infrastructure management tools in order to drive business outcomes. Often in reality, security kind of deviates from those important business outcomes. What this means is the solutions that need to be implemented in the cloud environments really have to be more cloud native. And we're seeing emergence of the policy-driven automation become a scalable and agile approach to securing the cloud environments. A good example of that is dynamic privilege authorization policy that's enforced automatically for users, both human and synthetic identities, to only receive or obtain the privileges as and when they need, and automatically also removing that. Now, this helps really empower the cloud teams and not become a speed bump or cause friction in the end user's experience. To your point earlier, you saw some friction in the past when the users didn't like the inconsistency of the tools. So that is really important. And that point, again, I want to reinforce here that integration with existing cloud-native automation tools, the cloud infrastructure as code or CI/CD pipelines, becomes a crucial part of the cloud-native solutions. So with that streamline, Sriram, I want to turn it back to you and ask a question. Any good examples from your own practical, experience of deploying cloud-native solutions that were able to integrate with cloud infrastructure and automation tools?
So definitely, one thing, again, I think I might be generalizing things too much, but the thing is, it's always a good idea to actually make the right or the secure solution the easiest solution for your teams to follow. So that makes it easy. So integrating your DevOps pipelines, we actually did integrate our CI/CD pipelines with cloud-native solutions that actually helped us with some of these aspects. So and we even actually, in certain cases, we actually had special purpose pipelines that actually did the privileged activities, and the users don't even have the direct privileges associated with them. So they had to actually run the pipelines to actually make certain things happen in the cloud. And these were purpose-driven pipelines which were attached to special, service principles with very right-sized privileges and so on, right? So that's the approach that I have seen to have worked. But in general, taking it one step up, making it, taking it to a layer, especially with the policy-driven automation and having something that works multi-cloud is definitely I see the future is going in that direction. So definitely a good point that you made there, Art.
Great. That's very encouraging to hear. Thank you. Well, in conclusion, we wanted to leave you with some takeaways. Clearly, security has to be an integral part of any organization's cloud journey, especially if it's a multi-cloud journey. We all agree securing root accounts or admin accounts on servers is important, and we'll continue doing that. But what's becoming abundantly clear is that identities and privileges are becoming the cornerstone of a cloud-native security solution stack that is meant to protect the organization, multi-cloud organization, from the risks in the cloud to allow them to benefit from the cloud opportunities. Any final thoughts, Sriram?
No, you covered it well, Art. In conclusion, all I can say is the security, the cloud is a different beast, and securing the cloud takes a cloud-centric approach. So just embrace what's cloud native and what's cloud first. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all. I think we have time for some questions, right? No?
Any questions?
Please.
What specific products have you used for just-in-time access? Any specifics to that?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say product names here, but we can discuss later if that's okay with you. Yeah.
No vendor promotion, Sriram? Sorry.
How do you balance between security and end-user experience? And in going through this process, was there any friction with the end users that were attempting to get access to something that may have been revoked because of this?
Definitely, right? So any major security initiative always has some friction one way or the other. And it's in our best interest, as I mentioned, is to make the right thing the easiest thing for them to do. So if it means that you have, even before you launch something, you have all the controls in place, you plan ahead and make sure that all your security requirements are met with the initiative helps. This is very generic in nature, what I'm saying, but this applies to any major security initiative.
Yeah, I just really like how you said it. Make the right thing is the best option for users, and they won't have to go around that. Thank you. Yes?
Extension of this was there any campaign made before you push everyone to use this tool?
Definitely, right. So actually getting the buy-ins from we took a top-down approach, get the buy-ins from the leadership involved. In this case, some of these were initially limited to the infrastructure teams that were onboarded first, right? So and then expanded to the DevOps, other product engineering teams. So, but definitely the campaign was there, getting the buy-ins and also making sure that they are comfortable with the approach taken. So this definitely helps in the success of the initiative.
Your experience when implementing something like this, which use case do you think was like you perceived it as a low-hanging fruit first, but it was very difficult to kind of see it to the end or really get the risk mitigation value of it, which you might have kind of underestimated it before in the beginning? Was there anything like that, or even the opposite of it, where you might thought like this was very challenging, but because of the tools that you used, it was quite simple actually?
No, actually, again, so on one of our cloud environments, it's not the big three, but something else. There were no native tools available for this, right? So we had to go source a third-party tool, and that actually helped us do this in a very short period of time. Whereas in the other scenario, there were native tools, but it also takes longer for the adoption to kick in because there were multiple layers of how you approach it. So I have examples of both if you want to discuss later. Yeah.
Talking about cloud a lot, you mentioned SaaS in the beginning. Is that some an area you see a lot of focus, or you're spending a lot of focus on trying to figure this out as well, or what's your?
So again, I'm just speaking for myself, right? So the current focus has always been on the PaaS and IaaS environments, but personally, I always have been in-app authorizations and in-app privileges have been a concern for me, and definitely I see that all of this as managing privileges within SaaS environments is also something that's key, and that more focus has to be made, but it's evolving.
And isn't it also related to where your data is, right? I mean, these SaaS applications are growing to become very critical because of the kind of data that the organizations manage and create in those applications. So essentially that gravity is going to shift or expand to the non-infrastructure, right?
Definitely, right? You need to protect wherever your data is, and it can be within your environments, it can be within your own cloud environments or somebody else's. So definitely I agree with that.
Right. Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for being a great audience.
Thank you. Enjoy the show.